today, like I say, you've got to draw the line between it's not politically correct. Um, you need. I remember an old judge, Abe Harkness. He once told me. I said to him, "How do you judge?" Because he's a guy that judged over 100,000 dogs. And I said, what's your secret? How do you judge? And he said to me, if I go into a show, if I go into an open class and there's 30 or 40 males, I would look for the dog that I would put my money on in the pit. There you go. If I have my last £50 and I need it, and that's the dog I would go for. So when I walk in, before I've touched the dog, I've got 2 or 3 in mind who look the part. And then it's just a question of going over the dog to see if teeth are right, the ears and the rest of it. So you just go, but you've already made up your mind, that one looks the part. And that stuck with me for years later. And when I judge the shows, it's the same thing. I like to go in there and look at all of the dogs and see which one looks like it could do the job. There has to be the physicality about it. I mean, even if you're choosing in a litter of pups, people say to me, how do you choose in a litter of pups? You want a dog that is sure of himself, not a troublemaker, not the dog that's tearing everything up. The dog that has that confidence, that little look in his eye, that cheeky little look, and the dog that's not phased, but not over the top. You need to, and so colour and cosmetics and all that is secondary. You want the dog that looks as though it could do the job. And it's hard to explain to people without them jumping to the wrong conclusions.
Exactly.
Now, if you're going to, go into any type of breed, for example, the Pit Bull Terrier, I'm a huge fan because it's the world champion, undisputed, of dogs. It can do, as Richard Stratton said, it can do everything any other dog can do and then whip them. So that's about it. And so the ban that came in, even though we're against the ban, somewhere along the line, maybe it's not such a bad thing, because a pit bull isn't a dog for everybody. A lot of unfortunate, they've fallen into the wrong hands. They got the bad blood publicity. So you can see that even though the laws are not right, when you know the nature of the beast, it's not for everybody. Now, when we go to the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, which is a watered down version of the true gladiator of before, you've still got certain lines that could do the job. But you've got to be very careful, because in today's society, these types of dogs could go into the wrong hands. If you breed a feisty type of dog and then he goes on the sofa with 2 cats and a couple of yappy dogs, and it's a recipe for disaster. So when you're going to own a breed or breed dogs like that, there becomes a responsibility, because behind you're going to have to pick and choose your owners. You're going to have to explain things. You're going to have to sometimes be honest with people and say, well, no, actually, I haven't got anything for you. It's not just a case of putting a couple together, producing some pups and selling them off. It's when you're trying to breed something which traditionally brings all the values of before, when you're trying to do that, it brings with it a big responsibility. So I've always kept my dogs. I've never been one for fashion and colours and heavy types and exaggeration. I steer clear of dog shows because, it's Darwin's worst nightmare. I've always produced dogs that I'd be proud to own. So I always stick, for the last 25 years, is my line, is my dogs. I step out occasionally, only with dogs that I know, and I keep my stuff as pure as it can be, but at least there's no surprises. Very often people run off and they're into outcrosses and, I'll have a bit of this and I'll have a bit of that. But you don't know what you're bringing in. So then if you're breeding something, it's, you know, you're putting your stamp on it, and you know, it's kind of like your guarantee. So if you're having scattered dogs into your line, yeah, so you know, this is why people say to me, you know, you stick. I've always stuck to what I know, and I plod on, and I've always done that. People say, yeah, but why don't you outcross more? Because I don't want to bring unknown stuff into a line. You know, it's like a famous chef who's made a soup that's perfect. Why would you put some ketchup in it? You know, you just stick with what you know. Don't start trying to. You know. So, anyway, that sort of answers your question. There are two trains of thought. Again, it's the Staffordshire Bull Terrier is there's how can you say it's. I've noticed it in the last 30 years. It used to be a nice place to be. And today it's full of underhand dealings and backstabbing, and everybody seems to be fighting for a place at the table. Now, it's good because, you know, a passionate breed obviously attracts passionate people. Not always, but going back to the origins, people say it was the bull and the terrier crossed. Okay, that's one theory. The other theory is it always has existed. That type of bulldog has always existed. Now, if you look in art of the 17th century, 18th century, you'll see Staffordshire Bull Terriers. So to suddenly turn around and say, yeah, it was the old English white terrier was crossed with a bulldog because, you know, they wanted a more of a sporty show because two heavy bulldogs fighting isn't exactly exciting because they lock on and then nothing really happens. Let's get a bit of terrier blood in there. Yeah, okay. It's simple, but if you look at how the breed developed, I think all breeds of dogs were bred for a purpose. Now, you had bulldogs, you had terriers, you had hounds, you had, and it's only afterwards when the Kennel Club got involved and there became money involved that people started splitting up the breeds. You know, the Norfolk Terriers and the West Highland Terriers, and you know, they were all one and the same, but they start splitting things up. Um, the Staffordshire Bull Terrier and the Bull Terrier, um, it was just one giant melting pot. So I find it hard to believe that suddenly one day somebody decided to cross their bulldogs with some terriers to create the Staffordshire Bull Terrier. I think personally, it's just my opinion, that the type of small bulldog has always existed, the Staffordshire Bull Terrier. It's only later that we labelled that type of dog as the Staffordshire Bull Terrier. And obviously, the club, when Joe Mallon, Fred Phillips, and everybody decided to put the club together, it was to try and regulate and make the breed more uniform and more acceptable, because the Bull Terrier was always accepted, and the Staffordshire Bull Terrier was the working man's dog. It's a fighting dog, so it was kind of shunned. Even today, it was the case. I remember a few years back, I was at Crufts, and the Staffordshire Bull Terrier at Crufts had the biggest entry of all the Staffords. Yet, politically, it's not correct. So the BBC, the television, switch off their cameras when they go past the Staffordshire Bull Terriers, even though they're the biggest entry. You know, because it's always had that reputation as. So they decided to declare the breed, and that's where the standards were rewritten, because the old standard with the bigger dogs, the leggier dogs, the pit type dogs, and they want to bring the standard down, standardize, uniform the breed, and make it a show dog. And I mean, you can go back. I think it was Bill Boylan who wrote that it's going to be the death of the breed. The moment you start showing these dogs, that's it. It's finished. So there was a big division even back then that these types of dogs shouldn't be brought into the sort of show world, if you like. So, and it's kind of like the border collies. It's kind of like the Patterdale Terriers. It's the working dogs. Nobody wants them to be a recognised breed, because the minute it's a recognised breed, it goes downhill. People start breeding for money and not for function. So, I personally think, to your question, that the the breed has always existed. That's just, from what I've read, what I've seen. You had bulldogs in the broad sense of the term, and it was just a small type of bulldog. Mm-hmm. Now others obviously believe, that there was a little dash of this and a little dash of that. But I mean, to be honest, even between the two world wars, the travel was very limited. So, there were small strains and small pockets in England where they bred their types of dogs. They're not going to go across the channel for an outcross. They're going to breed to the local dogs. So I just think that, it was a type of dog, and the minute that it was a recognized breed, then obviously you need to romanticize a little bit. You need to paint a sort of nice picture, Oh, well, the Staffordshire was a half bull and half terrier. Well, yeah, if you like, but that can also be a sort of a layman's way of explaining to people. To have a decent dog, it needs to be a balanced type. So, you don't want too much of the bulldog, you don't want too much of the terrier. So to explain it, you can say 50-50. But then people take that as proof, and they say, well, yeah, it's got to be 50-50. No, it's just a way of explaining what a balanced type of dog should look like. I mean, if you look at, what was I going to say? It's just gone out of my mind. In France, they like to describe the Staffordshire Bull Terrier as a bully type, a balanced type, or a terrier type. Now, that's just a way of explaining to people the types of dogs that you have. Don't exaggerate one way, don't exaggerate the other way. But people here actually take that as proof. I've got a bully type, or I've got a terrier type. But no, you've got a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and it can lean towards one or to the other. The show types, for example, may be heavy in the head, squat. This is why the standard, again, it was Belby. Belby had the sliding scale of the weight to the heights. Now, people should pay attention to that. I'll try and find it somewhere. But, if you have a small dog of 35 centimeters, for example, it should be weighing about 11 kilos or 12 kilos. Now, if you have a dog of 17 kilos, he should be sort of 40, 42 centimeters. So why is that? Because, then you could see that the dog would be balanced. If you have a dog of 35 centimeters that weighs 17 kilos, you've got a sort of puggy little type. So you're looking for that natural blend, because the standard was actually a blueprint for the perfect fighting dog. You see, people, if you follow all of the written standard, what you should have is a dog that would be the perfect specimen for the pit. But people don't look at that. Mm-hmm. People say, oh no, we're following, blindly, we're following that, it needs to look like this, and there's so many teeth, and but the standard originally was the blueprint for what should be considered the perfect fighting dog. So this is in Staffordshire Bull Terriers. Now, Stafford's, what I've learned in my long time in dogs is you can't really preach. You can't really say this is how a Stafford should be, because everybody has their own idea of what their dog should be. So all you can do is look at the standard and breed towards that. It's a guide, the standard. So this is the importance, for example, in the show ring, which I avoid, is you need to have the old judges that knew the old histories of the dogs, that can see a good dog. And you don't need to go into these exaggerations with the big heads, the chubby bodies. For example, in the dog shows here, they'll measure a dog for the height, yet they won't weigh the dog. So, you can have a dog when the standard is 17 kilos for a male. You can have a dog weighing 25 kilos. So it's completely out of balance. But they'll measure him and say, no, but he's the right height. Then you say, yeah, but what about the scales? No. Because again, it's all about entries. It's all about, if we're too strict, you won't have any entries. So Staffordshire Bull Terrier for me is just a small bulldog that's always existed, and it's come down. And the function was of the people of the Black Country. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier was have a functional terrier. It was as simple as that. I mean, they were poor people. They needed a dog that could catch a rabbit for the pot, could do some ratting, because streets weren't clean. There were slums. And if a dog was pugnacious enough to be successful in the pit, there was a certain notoriety that the owner would get. I mean, when you're all poor and you've got something that shines, so they will be, known in the area as having a decent dog. And obviously there's money involved, the betting. So hard times and sort of hard circumstances created this breed.